Boom. And now we have a nice simulation of 1,000 cylinders falling down into a pile. Welcome back to Blender Frenzy. I am Justin, and we are finally going to make our pile of 1,000 rolls of toilet paper, well, actually 1,000 cylinders. So let's get started. I'm going to just delete this one here. This is the setup that I had for all of my settings, just going over the settings for the physics. So you can watch those videos if you haven't already. But I'm just going to clear this rotation on this one here, bring it back to 0. And then this one has start deactivated checked. I'm going to uncheck that and then see what we have here. Okay. So right off the bat, I noticed that this is a little bit too bouncy. So I'm just going to change the bounciness down to 0.3. I think that was good. Yeah. So that looks like a nice little toilet paper roll drop. So yeah, something like that. And then I'm going to come up here to clean up some of this here. So I'm just going to rename the cylinder collection to objects. And then I'm going to rename the physics to physics original, or orig for original. And then I'm just going to delete that other collection there. Move the floor to physics original so it's out of this object. So we have something that looks kind of like this. All right, and so now we need to change our physics or rigid body world collection to physics original, that's what it is currently. All right, cool. We're trucking along here. Okay, so now we need to make 1,000 of these, and this is going to be very easy with our array modifier. So select the object, go to our modifiers properties, and then go to array. And let's go ahead and disable our overlays, and we can see that our count is 2 and our offset is 1. I'm going to change our count to 10, and then I'm going to change the offset to 1.2 to give a little bit more space in between. So let's copy this. And what that does is copy that on the X, but I don't want it on the X. I want it to copy this whole line this way on the Y. So we're going to change one of these. It doesn't matter. So you see we have 2 of them now. So it doesn't matter which one you change. I'm just going to change the topmost one here. I'm going to copy this and paste it in the Y. And then I'm going to change the X back to 0. So we have the cylinder duplicated 10 times on the X. And then we have the whole line here duplicated again 10 times on the Y. So we've got 10 times 10, which is 100. We've got 100 cylinders in a little square-like shape. So now all we have to do is duplicate this on the Z-axis 10 times to make our 1,000 cylinders. So let's go ahead and open these back up again. I'm going to copy the topmost one again. It's going to go out on the Y, but we're going to change that, put that back to 0, and then I'm going to put 1.5 here instead of 1.2, just to give it a little bit more space up and down. And now we have a cube of 1,000 cylinders. I'm just going to go ahead and save this and then save it as another iteration. And then I'm just going to apply all of these, all 3 of them. And now we have something that looks like this. Boom! Okay, wow. We have a big cube of cylinders just bouncing towards us. Well, what's going on here? Let's enable our overlays. You can see this is now just one object. So it's using this cylinder collision box here that we had previously set, but it's setting it to the origin, which is down here. Okay, so first of all, before I separate these into individual objects, I want to make sure that the collection is right. Come to your object properties and scroll down to collections, and then I'm just going to delete everything except for the objects collection that it's in. Now be careful with this. You might not be able to do that if your object disappears when that happens. Then you can just add it back. But I'm just going to try to delete everything from here except for the collection that it's in here. But if for some reason that deletes or makes your object disappear completely from the blend file, then go ahead and keep it and see if you can still work that way. But it looks like it's worked for me, so I'm going to keep it just like this. And now I'm going to save it, and we can tab into edit mode, make sure everything is selected. I'm just going to go into edge select mode so we can see it a little bit easier. And then press P to separate, and then we're going to choose by loose parts. And ta-da, everything has now been separated. They're all different colors randomly because I have random turned on. In order to do that, in your solid shading mode, go over here to the drop down, choose studio, and then random for your color. And what that does is if I select one of these here and then duplicate it, if I duplicate it, it will randomly assign it a different color, which is pretty cool. So I'm just going to undo that. And now it's easier to see all of them, and we've got all of our objects separated. So let's try and run our simulation. I'm going to turn off overlays first, and then press play. And it's not doing anything, My computer is cranking up the heat, and boom! Oh, we have this explosion! Oh my goodness, what's happening? Look at that. It's like an explosion of confetti all over the place. Or particles, and looks like Blender's particle system right here. So what is happening? Well, so let's go back to frame 1, and you can see, wow, that's pretty. Okay. The reason it's doing that is because we haven't changed our origins. If you notice, if we select all of our objects, by the way, if you deselect all of your objects like this, an easy way to select them is to come open your collection, select the first one, or any of them really, but the first one is this corner one down here, and then right click and then select objects. Now we have all of our objects selected. The reason that we have that explosion is because you can see all of our origins from all of these individual cylinders are concentrated all here, because when we separated them from the original object, that's where the origin was. So all of the origins stayed down there, and so all 1,000 origins from all 1,000 cylinders are concentrated in one teeny tiny point. And of course, that is recipe for a massive explosion, which is what we get. So with all of them selected, this is an easy fix. Right click, set origin, origin to geometry, and now all of them are back to their original origins in their original cylinders. Okay, so let's run that simulation again one more time. Boom, and now we have a nice simulation of 1,000 cylinders falling down into a pile. Now, of course, there is some work that we can do to this. There are several problems that we are facing. The first of them is if we scroll in here and look at this closely, you can start to see some of this is clipping. We've got them clipping into each other, and we do not want this at all. And by the way, if you can't see this very well, you can always come over and check outline. So you can uncheck the outline. It just gives it a nice outline to distinguish between them. And you can also change the color of that outline too. Here, just like that. But I find that nice black outline is good for our purposes here. So let's go back to frame 1. Let's select our main cylinder here. Let's go into overlays. Select our main cylinder here. And we're going to change it for our main cylinder first. So we're going to check collision margin and then just set that collision margin to 0. So previously we weren't using the collision margin at all, but now we're using it with a collision margin of 0. And notice that that only changes it for this one here. If we select all the other ones, you can see they're still not using that collision margin. So we have to make sure all of these are using these same settings here. And this is pretty easy too. So again, just make sure that we have, oh, I guess I got turned around here a little bit. So let's just change it for this one. This is our main one because we have it on the top here. Collision margin and 0. Okay, so select that one and then right click, select objects. And then with all of our objects selected, let's go to object, rigid body, and then copy from active. So now all of them have the same, should have the same collision margin at 0. And yes, they do. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run the simulation again. and see what we have. All right. So we've got our pile falling, and let's go ahead and stop it here and look at what we have. Okay, so it doesn't appear like anything is clipping into each other, which is good. So everything is just resting nicely on top of each other. So that is how you eliminate objects clipping with each other. Just make sure that collision margin is checked and it's at 0. Now we have a couple of other problems here. So after we change that collision margin, we have a really big problem of objects falling through the floor. So if we come back up here, you can see, look at all that. We got about half of them just being punched right through the floor there. And that is not good. That is not cool. So we don't want that at all. So there are several ways to fix objects falling through the floor if you have something like this. The first way is to make sure that each object in your scene is at a 1:1:1 scale. This is going to help the accuracy of objects colliding together. So just make sure everything is, and I'm pretty sure all of our cylinders are and our floor is. The next thing that you want to check for simulation accuracy is your ground floor, tap into edit mode, and having some subdivisions. So if you don't have any subdivisions here, if it's just one solid plane, then you're not going to probably get as accurate as results, and you probably have some more falling through the floor. Now I already know that my cylinder has the proper amount of geometry because that's how I set it up, but we've still got a lot going through the floor. So if those don't help, then what you can do is come over to your scene properties and to your rigid body world. And remember, in another video I explained that these three options down here, the split impulse, steps per second, and solver iterations, helped improve accuracy. Now I'm not going to do the split impulse because this lowers simulation stability, and it's just something that reduces extra velocity, which I don't think I really need in this instance. But if all else fails, you can try this. But I'm going to move over to steps per second. So I'm going to actually just increase this to 100. Now, if you hover over it, it does say that higher values are more accurate but slower. So it's going to slow down your simulation, so just keep that in mind. So let's see what we have now. I bumped that up to 100, and let's see if that helped. Well, that seemed to help maybe a little bit. We still got quite a few falling through the floor. So I'm going to bump this up to 150. Try it again. Okay, so it's slowing down a lot here, and okay, that really helped. Now we only got 3 falling through the floor there. So we can also try the solver iterations by making that 20. Try that again. Okay, oh, that actually was worse, so I'm going to bring that back down to 10. And maybe it could just be, oh yeah, and then that's 3. Let's bump this up to 200 and see what we have. Okay, there we go. So we don't have any falling through the floor now. We've got some rolling over, which is our next problem we're going to fix, but that is how you eliminate, or at least help reduce, objects falling through your floor. Okay, so moving on. Now we have, of course, because we have such a big collision, we've got a lot of momentum, a lot of velocity, and now they're all falling off the floor. But before we actually move on to fixing this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this collection so that we have something to fall back on just in case we screw something up later and we need to go back to our original physics setup. Now, after much painstaking trial and error, I have found out the wrong way to do this and then the right way to do this. So first I'm going to go over the wrong way and show you what not to do and why, and then we'll go over the right way to do this. So the wrong way is to duplicate this collection here. And now we have 2 collections. If I select these objects and grab them, you can see now we have 2,000 cylinders. So I'm just going to go ahead and disable or exclude this from the view layer. Okay, so now if we move these, we just have 1,000. And let's go ahead and run our simulation. So boom, and now it's going really ridiculously slow. And already, so it's a lot slower. And then as it keeps falling and falling into a pile, you're going to start to notice something different. You have these big gaps here. And not only do you have these big gaps, but if we scroll in here, go ahead and stop this for a second, you can see that we have some of these toilet paper rolls or cylinders floating in midair, like this one here. It's just floating in midair. It's not even touching anything. And if you look all around, you can see that happening everywhere. And if we continue playing our simulation, you can see that some of them are just moving in midair. And this took me forever to figure out. Well, if you watch my video on collections, you know that our view layer collections and our rigid body world collections, they are similar in that they overlap somewhat, but they are actually separate things. And so just because we disable this in our view layer doesn't mean that it's not active still in our rigid body world, which it is. And so if I uncheck this, or if I check this to enable it again, you can see that it fills in all of those gaps. So this, even though it's disabled, is still contributing to the physics of the world and the scene. Just keep that in mind. If I disable the other one, you can see it's the same thing, just in reverse. So you actually have 2,000 objects being simulated all together, and well, this would work if you wanted a big, huge pile of 2,000 of them. But that is not part of this this tutorial, so we don't want that. So the way to get around this with our setup here is to create a new collection, and I'm going to name this pile cylinder, and then move this collection into the pile cylinder collection, and then also move the floor into the pile cylinder, and then I'm going to rename this pile. Now I'm going to first disable this so that we have our physics objects here. Go to frame 1 to reset those. So now we have this to come back to in case we need to simulate our pile falling again. And this is going to be very helpful if we screw something up in the future, because after we freeze our pile, it's going to be very difficult to make another one. So we want to keep this one intact in case we need to go back to it. Okay, so I'm going to disable that. I'm going to change our physics collection, our rigid body world collection, to our pile cylinder instead, and then enable that here. If you have any glitches, if you don't enable or disable these, that's fine, but if you run into any glitches, you can just disable that and re-enable it again. It should clear any glitches. And now we have our original pile of just 1,000 falling, and you can now see that they are all together. They're not clipping each other, and they're not floating in midair. Okay, so now that we've got that, what we're going to do is try to eliminate these from falling off the floor. And the way we do that is just come over here in our cache to maybe around frame 20, I would say maybe around frame 29 or 30 here. Maybe, yeah, let's do 30. Nice even number. And with everything selected, so we don't have all of them selected, so let's go ahead and select our cylinder, right click, select all objects, select object, come to rigid body, and then apply transformation. So now this is going to be the starting point in our simulation, which means all velocity up until now has been lost. So let's go to frame 1 and then rerun our simulation, and now all of them just fall. And this is a really good technique if you want to create a tight pile without having everything just completely fall off your floor or fall into maybe some other parts of your scene that you don't want them to go into. It just kind of keeps it nice and tight. And so there you go. So at 86, and then I would even maybe do it one more time. So object, rigid body, apply transformation, and back to frame 1, and then play. And you can see them kind of settling down a little bit more. And then maybe there. Awesome. Okay, but now after the pile has been created, I don't want the physics in there anymore. So I'm going to remove all of the physics from all of these rigid bodies. So they're all still selected, which is good. I'm going to come to Object, Rigid Body, and then Remove. Now, once I do that, it's going to link them outside in my main scene collection. So if I collapse that, you can see this is out here in my main scene collection. Not a problem. All you have to do, make sure they're still all selected, right click, and then select Unlink. And I'm not sure why it didn't do it on the first try. I'm just going to undo that. I'm going to do right click again, Unlink, and there you go. So now we still have them in our pile cylinder pile, which is what we want. But now if we click on the individual cylinders, you can see that they no longer have the rigid body applied to them anymore. They are just objects in a Blender scene, just sitting there, laying there peacefully and quietly. And since they don't have any rigid body anymore, it's going to be difficult to make them back into our original setup that we have without having to make an array and duplicate all of them again, which is why we kept this physics original. So all we have to do if we want to rerun the simulation is just disable this. Well, let's actually grab our floor, pull our floor back up here. And I do that because I just don't want to duplicate the floor all the time. It changes the color, and I like the color that the floor is right now. All right, and so we got enable these, but we have to change our rigid body world collection to physics original, like we had it before. And then all we have to do is just rerun that simulation. Of course, again, it's kind of glitching out. After we change our collection, just make sure we disable this, re-enable, and there we go. Now we have another setup where we can make another pile the way we want to make it. And of course, we probably wouldn't do it with this one. We would just, of course, copy this into another collection down here and then rerun that simulation again, always keeping this intact so we can always fall back on that one. But we don't need that, so we're going to disable that, and we will come back here. Oh, let's go get our floor again. Put our floor back. Okay, so now the next step is to replace all of these cylinders with our toilet paper roll, which will happen in the next video, so stay tuned and you'll see me over there.